All right, thank you all very much for joining this afternoon for our workshop on our financial industry tabletop scenario. My name is Nick Anderson. I'm the Chief Security Officer with the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative, CSFI. We had two of our leaders present already this morning with Paul de-Souza and Mr. Marc Jamison. So, just to get us started here, I want to make sure we set expectations appropriately. This isn't going to be a red team attack or a red team assessment or anything where we have live simulations demonstrated of an attack on a financial infrastructure. What we will be doing is we're going through a fictitious scenario created by subject matter experts within the IT, cybersecurity, and financial industry with the realistic expectations for what really could happen in a real-world cyber attack. And we're going to walk through how we think our group here would react. What's the first things they might think? What are the reactions they might take? What should be the direction the government takes in a situation such as this? So to get us started, I'm going to pass this down and allow our panel members the opportunity to introduce themselves to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rakesh Asthana. Everyone calls me Ash. Can you hear me?
No,
it's not on.
No, it's on, but we don't have any mics here for the audience. The mic is on for the recording, so just
Okay.
take it, but speak loud.
All right. So again, my name is Rakesh Asthana. I'm an ex-World Bank employee, and I've been with the World Bank for 30 years, and last 12 as Director of IT and Office of Information Security. I have dealt with a lot of actual incidents as well, which are not simulated. So and also gone through a lot of tabletop exercises, so some experience in this.
Okay, I'm Paul de-Souza. I'm the founder and director of CSFI, the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative. I actually have a technical background. I've worked for CSE, US Robotics, Cisco Systems. I was a chief security engineer for AT&T. Today, I run an organization, a nonprofit organization, that's actually specialized in cyberspace operations training, aka cyber warfare. We have some really interesting clients, and we're doing some great work out there. And this is just such a great opportunity for us to exchange some ideas and see how government and industry would exchange ideas and collaborate and share knowledge. So I'm more of a technical guy, but nowadays I do a lot of, I guess, community organizing. You know, we have 25,000 members, so I present a lot, you know, overseas, and I was traveling. We just certified the Spanish Cyber Command, so we trained and certified their Cyber Command along with their Cyber Commander, a general. So we do that kind of work. We go out there and we help Cyber Commands. We do a lot of work in Estonia, Georgia. That's pretty much it.
My name is Marc Jamison. I recently retired from the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, 24 years in as a colonel. My last job was at Fort Meade. I helped stand up U.S. Cyber Command. I was a B-1 Weapons Systems Officer for 12 years. So I'm also an electronic warfare officer. So where Paul is on the technical side, I'm more on the strategy side. I'm a trained strategist. My last two jobs was Director of Operations at Network Warfare, the predecessor to Cyber Command, and then Director of Future Operations for Cyber Command. And I'm actually on board Paul's board of directors. I also have my my company, which is a consulting company. And I actually am just developed a strategy and plans course for CSFI for training how to think about cyber warfare, how to think about strategy and plans. There's a lot of courses out there on technical aspects, but what I've seen is that there are not a lot of people thinking about how you put and connect dots.
Very good, sir. Thank you.
All right, so on that note, talking about strategy and plans, one of our goals here today is to make sure that we increase the scope of what everybody understands the threat to the financial sector to be, because as has been previously mentioned in several of the different speakers' topics that they talked about this morning, the financial infrastructure of a country or of the globe isn't necessarily just banks. It's not just being able to go to the gas station and get gas. It's governments, it's people being able to make payments, it's electronic transactions, it's anything and everything. Finances underlies just about anything we do, and it really is a national security issue. So to build upon many of the things that the speakers were able to talk about this morning and earlier this afternoon, I'm going to go ahead and frame this scenario for our scenario this afternoon. So in our scenario this afternoon, we have several different players, both state and non-state. To begin with, we have nation state A. Nation state A is a European-based NATO member 5 years into an economic recession. They're experiencing countrywide physical protesting due to its welfare program no longer distributing payments. The citizens of nation state A believe that the government has run out of funds to pay the new universal credit. Whatever the reasons, citizens who require this assistance are not able to get their payments in a timely manner. The nation is in turmoil, with people going hungry, unable to afford food without these payments being distributed. Furthermore, the country's ATM system also appears to be down, indicating that there may be a widespread financial crisis in the works. In reality, nation state A's government is scheduled to vote on further reform to its welfare scheme, but at the present time it has not canceled its welfare program and does not yet understand why the funds have not been distributed to all the respective parties. Initial findings indicate that the payment system is fully operational. More alarming, findings indicate unusual network activity around the time of payment distributions originating from a nation-state B. Nation-state B is a nation that is not adversarial with nation-state A, but they do have a terse cultural history. The investigation is taking longer than expected due to a couple of factors. First, the mass physical protesting targeting government sites are severely limiting government employees coming into the office and being able to support recovery efforts. Secondly, recent outsourcing of key network infrastructure components to private companies does not automatically come with the right to audit, and this has slowed and hindered efforts additionally. Thirdly, the suspicious network traffic from nation-state A is proving difficult to resolve, as people have not taken the time to build relationships and build appropriate contacts across borders. Therefore, it's taken additional time to investigate who they should contact regarding certain matters. As for our attacker is Organization Bravo, which is a grassroots political movement. Organization Bravo, so we can draw a parallel here, think about it as an online organization, maybe much like Anonymous. They're taking actions to highlight alternatives to government planning, especially key budget cuts and planning around those cuts. Organization Bravo demonstrates its beliefs through physical protest, guided by social media that allows people to organize and subsequently gather for the physical protest. Organization Bravo has a task force that has been operating independently and has created a scenario to strengthen the awareness of its beliefs via online protesting, and is responsible for carrying out this attack. They want to hold the welfare payments in order to cancel the program in next week's vote. They have done this by compromising the welfare payment network and redirecting those payments to nation-state B in a false flag attack. This has been effective in strengthening the physical protesting at the government sites, thereby delaying the vote and allowing citizens more time to become aware of the importance of the vote. Additionally, as the government telework policy has kicked in due to protesting blocking access to the physical sites that they need to work at, the task force has recently launched a distributed denial of service attack against the government VPN system, severely impacting recovery timeline with a rented botnet. The recession has hit the middle class hard, with unemployment rates soaring from 4.6 to 26.4%. Subsequently, government debt has rose to 30% of the GDP in 2004 to 82.3% of GDP in January of 2012. In short, the government has been hit with financial issues and is forced to cut back on government programs that sustain its poor and those that it needs to take care of. In order to retain its high credit status, without which the cost of borrowing to support the national debt would rapidly become crippling, this has led to potential talks for call from the IMF for emergency funding. So now we'll move through our slides for the first time. So I believe we've already talked about the mission statement of CSFI at various points throughout the day, both through Paul's presentation, Marc's presentation. The core of what we're here to do is provide education, training, and awareness. So here we've just set the scene for you, and we've described our actors. Now we're going to go through the stages of the attack. The stages of the attack have been varied, and it has not been a short time coming for the organization planning the attack, Organization Bravo. In fact, the overall planning for this attack has been more than a year in the making, with passive reconnaissance alone going more than 100 days, including public searches, public network information, dumpster diving, social engineering of employees, etc. Active reconnaissance includes scanning of the networks, human intelligence, spear phishing of insiders, all in an attempt to gain access, which is our next stage, which lasts nearly 2 months. In gaining access, we're exploiting the insiders with their usernames, passwords, and keys, and moving on to internal sniffing and enumeration. So we're trying to identify or enumerate specifically what the network infrastructure is that we're trying to exploit on the inside, and then moving on into exploitation. This again is just walking through the stages of the attack, which we've outlined for you previously. So now we're going to move into what we actually want to do here, which is our panel discussion and our questions. So gentlemen, whoever would like to go first, can you start by telling me what's the first thing that you think about when you hear about this scenario?
Well, from my technical perspective, the very first thing that came to mind was when we had some suspicious traffic as part of the welfare payment system. I thought about the CERT. That was the very first thought that came to mind. First of all, who identified the suspicious traffic? How was that identified? And then, to me, it looks like nothing was reported. Is that correct?
It was reported until it was transmitted.
Right. So that's my very first thought, is just where's the line of communication between this organization, and that's the government, right, pretty much, and the CERT. How come there was no communications? That would be my very first question, and I'm sure that would get into some kind of investigation of sorts. Someone would probably lose their job at this point.
Or two or three.
Or yeah, maybe a group of them. But that's definitely a big no-no.
Thanks, Paul. I think those are very perceptive comments. But I think the first thing that had struck me was, I think you're mentioning that the credit markets are getting squeezed, that there may be a liquidity crisis in the banking system. I think that's what you were referring to. And the first thing that comes to my mind is you absolutely have to prevent a liquidity crisis. And somewhere the central banks and the banking organization would need to come in and respond in a very powerful way not to let that happen. So that's the first thought that came into my mind when we see these kind of scenarios. And the second corollary to that is, some sort of diplomatic engagement very quickly with nation state B, because at this stage I understand we still don't know whether it's Operation Bravo or or it's the nation state B. So some understanding of where the attack is coming from, what can we do, and so I think that was the second piece of information, building on what you said about the cert getting activated, and that would be something else that comes to mind.
So you're talking about, some form of attribution or trying to find out the source of the attacks.
Especially if you're not an adversary with the nation state B,
Okay.
then I think we may not have absolutely the best of engagement with them, but we would certainly engage to find out what's going on, what their position is on this diversion of payments from nation state A to nation state B. I mean, that's obviously unusual activity, and we would very quickly be able to get them engaged in finding out from their side also, so you can quickly investigate what's going on in this scenario.
So what comes across my mind is there's nothing new under the sun. So ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance has been going on for a period of time. And what I've seen in the past is if you don't have a baseline to understand where you are and then where you're going or where you are at, then you have a very difficult time talking to leadership and trying to make a case for an anomaly. And so baselining is key. And so there needs to be regular baselining along the way. And then it needs to be like a recorder where you can go back and look at where you were and where you are and try to identify anomalies. So that's first thing that comes through my mind. And then, we talk about, General Dempsey talked about at Brookings Institute having a playbook. So for every mission critical or every critical business process that your organization or a major organization has, they should understand those paths, and they should understand what normal is. And so when things happen abnormally, then you can start comparing and contrasting. In the military, at least in the United States, we call this mission assurance. And mapping your mission or your business practices is huge. It's manually intensive, but you need to understand if you have a business practice or a mission, you need to understand the nodes, the communication paths, the authorities, who it goes through. In this baking situation, there's a good chance that contractors or somebody have some control over what's going on and being involved. And what we've seen from the advanced persistent threats is that they will go after the soft underbelly. And so you start thinking about understanding your mission and understanding, do you have visibility into your mission set or your business practices. Albert Einstein said that if he had 1 minute to save the world, he'd spend 59 seconds understand the problem. Well, in today's world, you can't start from here. You've got to be trying to understand the problem all the time. You have to be diligent. You have to be aware. You have to baseline. You have to look for anomalies. And you need to protect your business practices. We use a term in the military called PDAL, Prioritized Defended Asset List. And so if we're going someplace and we have to set up Patriot missiles, we're going to put that where we have to defend first, and we're going to prioritize that. And so there needs to be that kind of thinking in business practices also. What are you going to defend? And liquidity, the nation's bank and so forth is obviously one of those areas that you'd want to defend first. Prioritize.
That's a good point about the information assurance. I don't know if that's something that you guys have here in Israel. You probably follow some kind of framework to certify your federal systems. I'm assuming that this is an agency, right, that saw the abnormal traffic, or I'm thinking government?
This was an incident investigation.
Okay. So in the U.S. we have information assurance, what it is just pretty much a set of guidelines. Could be NIST, if you guys are familiar with that. And it's pretty much a list of security controls. Okay, so what you do, we have to go through that list and make sure that all the systems are certified and that they're secure. I mean, nothing's perfect, so there's no perfect security, of course, but you have a certain standard that you have to follow. So it looks like to me that we also have an issue, and you were talking about that, knowing, things before
Baselining.
Baselining.
We do have that in the financial system.
You do have, you follow a standard.
The central bank has a set of directives that each financial institution has to follow.
Okay, so we have to be compliant
Yes.
with a
Yes.
certain.
You have to audit systems. You have to.
Okay.
Very clear set of directives.
Let me ask you, do you have to comply to connect? So one of the things that is out there we saw is that you have all these different organizations connecting to the network, but there's different standards. And the problem is that if there's not one standard and it's not enforced, then there's a soft underbelly to where the attacker can get through. And if there's this concept out there that if you have to comply to connect. So if you try to connect, but I see you don't have, Service Pack 3 or whatever, you can't connect. So we have to get to that point, and that would be one of my observations in this. How did they get in? Was it hygiene? Was it unauthorized devices? Was it an insider threat? So, I mean, that's, you start thinking about policies and authorities and so forth.
Yeah, and you're right. It sounds like, even though I don't know if they were compliant, do you have any information on that? We can get to it later. Okay, good. Yes, sir.
There's a point here that I think was made by Marc. I think it's less of a technical problem because somebody found out about the suspicious traffic, but like I think you said, there was no communication here. Marc?
Nick and Marc.
Okay. Nick said that a lot of the workers were outsourced workers with no audit provisions. So there's something organizational here that we need to address. There's outsourced workers running around finding out suspicious networks with nobody to report to.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. The sad thing is the fact that the network was compromised, and this is a network that holds money, right, or the ability to make payments to the population. So definitely those are critical systems. So I don't know how well protected they were, but they were compromised. And then the point that he made, I can't really read your name.
Oh, it's Jonathan.
What's that?
My name's Jonathan.
Jonathan, okay. But you're right. After the fact, okay, we're compromised. Now, what do? Are we too embarrassed to maybe contact CERT, because that's also an issue? A lot of these organizations will be embarrassed to say, holy cow.
The regulator has said that if you are compromised, you have to report within
Immediately.
certain time.
Oh, you do have
You must.
You must report.
Okay, let's see.
And if you don't, you are going to be fined later on.
Exactly.
Going to be fine.
Which
Okay.
financial institutions don't like. They don't like to be fined.
No, they don't. Yes, sir.
There's something a little bit unrealistic about this scenario.
Okay.
All of the discussion of the weaknesses of the information security is fine. The discussion of information assurance is absolutely fine. But actually, once the loss of money to country B has been discovered, it's possible to cut it off pretty well immediately because the central bank can simply close the SWIFT gateways by order. It reports to the Bank of International Settlements in Basel that there's a problem with international payments. It it can either tell the public this is why we're closing the SWIFT gateway and you cannot actually transfer money out of the country until we've worked out what the hell's going on, or it can come up with some pretext. The question of how you manage the crisis actually is a little bit more complicated. How do you tell the public what's going on? Is a very important part of this whole discussion. But because the SWIFT system is actually designed to be able to cut off payments at the gateway in certain circumstances, including basically all kinds of suspicious payment, because there are anti-money laundering regulations that apply in SWIFT too. So you can stop the flow of money pretty quickly. The problem arises if the money is being transferred through an alternative payment system outside SWIFT, possibly. Let's say if all of the payments are being carried out through a mobile payment network. But even then, because the payments have to be cleared, this is one of the reasons why you tell BIS, because they're going to control the international clearing system. So you can actually stop the financial loss relatively easily. And then you work out what to do. You have to basically create a snapshot of all of the payments. And by the way, if payments are being carried out through SWIFT, you also know to which accounts, where, in which country, which banks. So it's then possible to trace them and demand redress. Now, I'm not saying it works perfectly because the anti-money laundering system is actually seriously broken. This is my main area of activity, so I'm talking from little experience.
Yeah.
But there's plenty that can be done here.
And that's great. Some of the stuff that we want to be able to get to. I'm really sorry. I hate to cut you off. We're already a half hour into this. Some of the things we're going to get to are going to be some of those softer issues, the non-technical issues. Like actually the next thing we're going to cover. I'm not sure who wants to pick it up, but is from your perspective, who is going to be most appropriate to communicate with the public in this sort of instance, and what is going to be their priority in communicating to the public.
Let me ask you, is there any more in the scenario? Is there any more detail?
Maybe.
Well, I just trying to manage.
This is the first immediate communication mid investigation. No additional details have been derived at this point.
Okay.
So if I may, on this particular point, just picking up from where David left off, the most trusted person in this scenario would probably be the Minister of Finance or the Governor of the Central Bank, because it deals with the financial system, the networks, and so I think that's the person who would be the spokesperson on this, to talk to the nation and tell them about what's going on, what steps we are taking to immediately cut off the flow of funds, etc., the actions that we're taking, as well as, to sort of calm the panic in the markets, if you may. So I think the soft side of the communication needs to begin from either the Ministry of Finance or the central bank. The governor of the central bank would take that step next.
And I would add, to the best of their ability to talk about facts. One of the things I think we discount is the power of our constituents or our customers to understand the situation. Tell them the truth. Tell them that the payments were made. It appears there may be something, they may be hijacked. Give them as much detail as you feel comfortable with, because then you can start building some rapport with the citizens. I mean, this country is going through a 5-year recession, and it appears that they've lost some faith in the government. But if you can, talk about the facts and talk about the plan of action that you have in place, hopefully have a playbook, I think that's critical.
Okay. So I guess honesty, going back and reporting, actually talking to the public. And you said the central bank would be a good
Spokesperson on this.
Sure.
player to tackle that one. Okay, now as far as the going back to the technical aspect of it, as far as the details of what happened, is that something that should be communicated to the public, or that's something that should not?
So my opinion is,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
being in the military, you tell them the facts.
Oh,
You tell them the facts as you know them. You let them know it's work in progress, ongoing investigation. But it's okay to start laying out the landscape, because if you don't, they're going to think you're hiding something from them. They already distrust you.
Yeah.
So I think you empower the Minister of Finance. He talks about the facts. He brings up his team. You lay things out as you know it. And that also acts as a deterrent. So, you have to have a counter strategy to deal with whoever you're dealing with. And so this is not only about reaction, this is about the next move, game theory, next 2 or 3 moves. So you have to think about how you react, the adversary's reaction, and then your reaction. It's just not one move at a time. It's 3 or 4 moves at a time.
So might help the attacker.
So
Might help the attacker.
It might. That's a risk. But I think, let me just make a comment here. But I think your biggest concern is not really the money. Your biggest concern is public perception.
The confidence.
Yes, the trust,
Confidence.
like David said.
Absolutely.
The trust.
Financial system.
Yes.
So I think just to sort of build on the point you're making, I think I would suggest that we stay away from technical detail at this stage, because typically it takes a lot of work on forensics to really understand what happened, and we've all seen that in our own incident that I've dealt with. It can take a week or more to really nail down what the hell happened here. So I would not go out and immediately start speaking on technically, because you probably, whatever you know at that time is likely to be incorrect a week later. So you want to stick to the facts which we can verify. At the same time, you want to build confidence. You bring in the big guns like the governors and all I've talked about, but hold off on sharing too much technical details or helping your adversary and all of that thing. That does not need to be done. But I mean, to the extent that money has moved to nation state B, that may be something, and if we want to be upfront but also engage, that we are working with them to figure out what's going on here. It may be an errant payment, for example. I mean, and the other thing I wanted to mention is, typically if this is the scenario, from what we have done in many countries, these payments that are made to beneficiaries usually come from a social action system of some kind, like a social security system.
right.
So you may want to actually shut that system down. So it's not that we would shut down the payments at the boundary where the Swift gate or so. You would actually shut it down from the payment from where they actually being sourced from. Because typically in all organizations which make payments to beneficiaries of this kind, there is some system which determines this and actually initiates the payment through the network. And the government has control over that, obviously. And if you block that system, then you don't need to worry about money leaking out any further until we figure out what's going on. And then I think the other kind of responses that we have seen is they typically do like standing orders. So if 10,000 people were getting the certain amount of money every month, they would instruct the banks to release the same amount of money to their accounts without these kind of instructions. These are all standing orders that the central bank can issue. And so I think some mitigating steps would be taken to help the public retain and build the confidence while holding back a little on the technical details until we are damn sure this is what's going on, until there's a forensic report of some kind. And so I think that's sort of one of the scenarios that would come to my mind.
So to follow on with building on the public's trust and shaping the public's perception of what's going on here, what truly becomes the top priority of the government at that point? Is it taking care of the citizenry, making sure that people do have money, that they do have access to the ATM network, and the government employees can work to begin restoring services or begin their forensic investigation? Or is it a retaliation and defense to make sure that the threat's eliminated so they can rebuild confidence and that this threat won't persist against the government any longer.
Nick, I'm not sure this is an either-or question, because I think you almost have to do both. I think first order of business is to restore confidence, ensure there's liquidity, ensure people who have been affected are going to have access to money. But that doesn't mean that we won't be able to lock down certain systems. We won't be able to, start initiate some actions around figuring out the forensic side of it.
All right, so I probably have some mixed feelings with this one. First thing, I believe that we should let the population know that there was a cyber attack. That's part of actually building that trust. Okay? Yes, it's going to sound bad because, people are going to think, well, the system is not really safe or secure. But again, sometimes in order to build trust, you have to make yourself vulnerable. So you got to tell the truth. So, and that's part of our plan, right? We're going to go out. We don't have to give the details to the population, correct? But we're going to say what's happening. There's a cyber attack coming from maybe a state actor or whatever. At that point, it's speculation. We don't know. Now, in terms of retaliation, when we're talking about or fighting back, you do have that windowing of opportunity of when you can actually strike back according to international laws, by the way. You cannot retaliate after a certain period of time. So, if we do have plans to counterattack, and if this is actually an act of war, then we'd have to have a plan in place for that fairly quickly before it's just too late. Like, an example right now, Iran, for example, and Stuxnet. It's too late now if they want to, do anything about it in terms of retaliation, because they had that opportunity when the attack was actually taking place.
Within the legal framework.
Within the legal framework of international.
They don't have the right.
Yeah, right now they can't do that anymore. Okay, so they couldn't. Well, it's their choice, whatever. And they were not on the ball with this stuff, So we're lucky with that one. But I don't know. I think the retaliation should be on the table from a military perspective, maybe. Well, it would have to be from a military perspective. At that point, we would have to have Cyber Command step in or something, most likely. But okay.
Going back to your first issue, when coming out to the public with the information regarding the attack, are you going to pinpoint which system was attacked, or are you going to broadcast that the government was attacked and not mentioning a specific area or a specific system? What's the idea of going out to the public? How are you going to address the public in specific? Because I think if you're going very general,
okay,
and so the ongoing damage coming from the mistrust coming from the public will create a much bigger havoc when they don't know where to go. Okay, they will stop everything. This is from my perspective.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
I take the perspective, you tell them what happened. You tell them what system was hit. You be straight up with them, because you can deal with the facts that way. If you try to hide and be vague, it's going to come out anyway. I mean, that's one thing you learn. It's going to come out anyway. So you may as well be in control of the facts. You don't need to express the details, but you can be in control of the facts. And I think that's healthy. I think that builds a trust. And that's really the issue here. It's trust with the people. It's not the system. The system, we'll figure out the system.
You know, about pinpointing which system was attacked.
I think you are in a trust deficit now. I think anything you can do to build that trust is good. Now, at the same time, you know, one of the things we haven't talked about here is, first thing that comes to my mind is your partners and your allies. You know, so you may be down on your butt, literally. Hopefully you've already been reaching out for your friends. And like I said earlier, there's nothing new under the sun. And so hopefully you've built up a coalition of the willing. Because if it happened to you, it's going to happen to others. And this is a NATO country, and they have protocol for those kind of things. So I think you raise the flag high and fast, and you bring on board your big guns, your help. That provides a deterrent factor. There was one other point I was going to make, but I can't remember.
Then it's not important.
I think Marc's right that you would talk about the specific systems that were affected, but I would also put it much more in the business context of how is the public going to feel this attack? If indeed there are 10,000 people whose payments have been diverted, then I would, from a government perspective, have a plan how we're going to help those 10,000 people and make up that amount that was diverted in some ways. So that's what the public will want to hear to restore some confidence over and above the high-level specifics. We don't want to go into how the attack happened, what the forensics will reveal, that sort of thing. But to say it happened on the social security system, we are taking these steps, that much you have to come up with, because otherwise, he's right. I mean, you end up with this scenario that they're holding back on something, and it's counterproductive in that sense. The communication is obviously going to be extremely tricky, and we've all been through this, and there's never a right way and right amount, and you probably will have to communicate in many different ways. So it may not just be the central bank governor and minister of finance. It may need to devolve, down the road to many different banking community and others also to take up the same messaging at different levels.
Okay, so we talk about disaster preparedness. So business practices like this, or mission assurance focus, requires a disaster preparedness mentality. So every organization, like a tabletop like this, starts the conversation. Then those that are in control of their processes, the business practices, their missions, should have their continuity of operations plan. So it's not if it's going to happen, it's when, especially in digital world today, right? It's going to happen. If your company or organization has not been compromised, you probably just don't know about it, because it probably has. And so you have to have your plans and your tabletops and your playbooks, and the leadership has to understand. And what I found in my different roles was that once you started doing tabletops and exercises, you could go back to the leadership as you educated them along the way and say, and they become an advocate for more resources, more focus, involvement, and frankly, buy-in to the plans. Because if the Minister of Finance can come up and say, we have a playbook, if something like this happened, we're following these steps, and he can tell the President, this is what we're doing, you're already halfway there. It's when you don't think about a problem set and a challenge, and now you're trying to recover. As a strategist and a planner, you're behind. You owe it to the people that already have a plan. Disaster preparedness plan. This is the analogy I use.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
And you don't start making up things on the fly, because you're going to make mistakes. You had a question, sir.
Yes. It seems that the attack took a long period of time. it must be not one-man show, but an organization of few of attackers. My question is, where is the intel of the government about this attack? This is a very serious thing. And it must have been some sort of intel before the attack happened. So,
Yeah, what are the indicators?
Yeah.
I agree.
Do you have any? All right. For a second, I'd like to capitalize on something that Paul said actually a few minutes ago. You don't have to give me that look. So, could an attack against a financial institution or a financial system like the one launched here by a non-state actor actually be considered an act of war, or is it just an act of terrorism? And if it's one of the two, with its political agenda hoping to influence the government, how would the difference between those two change or potential response, moving past taking care of the citizenry, moving on to attack and defend as you hope to start operating the network again? How would the difference between those two change your response?
Well, you can have a state-sponsored attack or state-condoned attack. My opinion, I believe that if we find anything that points back to a government, PLA, whatever you name it, okay, it goes back to a military organization, then we do have a problem. Then that's when Cybercom, DOD, or the MOD would step in. Now, how to react? That's something that we would have to, it has to be proportional as well. You can't, I know that this is a very serious attack, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that because we were attacked in this fashion. Well, there you go, loss of life. Let's talk about that. Did someone die from not getting their paychecks? I don't know. If there's a loss of life, things also change. Because this is not cybercrime to the point where you're going to take someone to court and try to prosecute them. If it's a state actor, state-sponsored or condoned, and there's a loss of life, then we're building a case here that may end up in conflict, of some sort of physical conflict. Or maybe not. Maybe the way to respond would be through cyber means. You don't have to respond with bombs. We could respond through the wire and use some offensive operations to disrupt their capabilities. But that's really a strong message. But I think that those are the things. Loss of life would be a very important one.
I think to me the question that comes up is, before we retaliate, we need to know whom to retaliate against. And the indications here where nation state be, but we are also saying that the organization Bravo is involved, who's an internal to your country, and we have not yet established who the adversary is. So the idea of a quick response retaliation may in fact be a wrong response over time. So I think that may be something that I agree with. If the loss of life or very clear indication whom to go after, that's a clear-cut case. But the scenario presented to us seems to be quite ambiguous. And in fact, if indeed turns out to be somebody internal to our own country and we have attacked country B, that's a pretty nasty scenario. It'll be worse than what happened in 2003, I suppose. So I think we have to be careful about how we calibrate the responses, and that's why my point about trying to make sure that we do our forensics and establish where we go before So, and if we lose the window of retaliation, then so be it. I mean, that's fair, but I think I would be cautious rather than responding at the moment as far as the scenario goes at this point.
But you have to be careful because you might get the second wave, second hit. You have to know what's going on. I mean, the money that you're supposed to spend is for the poor people. The rich and the middle class, they don't get hurt from that. But you have to be, the second it happens, you have to get ready for the second hit. And you're not related to that in terms of understanding what's going on politically, etc.
I think the question here would be, my point is that, well, retaliation help, and if we attack the wrong people, it's not going to help you at all.
But I'm saying, put aside the retaliation. What are you going to do? You are under attack. The attack has not stopped yet. Until you know who and why, the attack is going on. That's how I think it should be understood.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So, some thoughts. I actually wrote my Army War College paper on sanctuaries. And we're talking about a sanctuary. And the bottom line is sovereign nations are responsible for activity inside their borders. That is the biggest hammer you have. And so, while Paul quickly says Cyber Command, I would say the dime, diplomatic, information, military, economic. You have to use all those arrows in the quiver to apply pressure, along with your allies and the coalition of the willing, to that nation, that sovereign nation, to try to help identify what's going on. And by their reaction and by their openness, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly if it's state-sponsored or not. But that is really the biggest hammer you have. So you read about these proxies and countries going, I don't know where it came from. That's malarkey.
You know exactly where it came from.
It's malarkey. It is. It's an excuse that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And if you study about sanctuaries, whether it's a physical sanctuary or a virtual sanctuary or a financial sanctuary, it doesn't matter. The sovereign nation, can impose its will. And in fact, that's exactly what's happening in the digital world today. There was a case, I don't know, back in October timeframe where, all cloud computing there's a bunch of talk about cloud computing. And the lawyers are trying to determine who owns the data in the cloud. So if you put your data in a cloud in Australia, do you own your data anymore? Or does the cloud provider own the data? Because it has to be legally definable where somebody can be held accountable for the loss of data, whether it's your financial records, credit cards, or your medical. And so it's really challenging right now.
When you outsource, who owns the data?
That's right. That's a question. When you outsource, who owns the data?
Within your country.
And so here's what's happening throughout the world. Every country is coming up with their own standard. But they are also figuring it out that they can control, throttle, if you may, how they handle digital rights by their own sovereign laws. Like the EU doesn't want things going outside of the EU. Well, okay. And then countries, Germany doesn't want it going outside Germany. And so here you go. You've got this challenge that's out there. But flip that around analogy-wise, those sanctuaries physically belong somewhere. So you have to hold them accountable. You can't have it both ways. And so I think that's where you go first. I think you always, especially this day and age, you always have to have what we call response options. You should have response options on the table, ready to go. And one of the biggest challenges for me was, what does somebody call an attack? Is blocking someone's port an attack? I don't think so. So, there's definitions out there that are questionable. So you have to come up with response options. You have to think about it, do the tabletops, the exercises, and so forth. And blocking and tackling is not considered an attack, if you ask me. Those are some thoughts.
Through forensic investigations later on, the attack was determined to have originated from the home network of an employee through a high-volume electronic funds transfer through BYOD policy from a device that was being used in the home, like with the VPN that the government employees were using, and was being used in the workplace. In Brazil, they've had attacks on financial institutions where often the home user is actually the attack vector. Should banks and institutions that authorize fund transfers require users to maintain a specific level of layered security, and should this be an international standard?
World Bank.
Well, no, I think to me this stage has already been crossed in some ways, and at least in many of the financial institutions, it's now a requirement that you have a higher level of managed security, even on a bring your own device policy. So we would have an MDM solution on iPads or whatever you want to use for transacting business. And secondly, we would almost always require a two-factor authentication to have non-repudiation of that transaction that came through. So some measures of this kind, I think, are already policy in some ways, at least in some parts of and it could very well, I think this maybe heading is becoming a national level policy set. So I do agree that, if they have not used some of these mechanisms to have proper authentication, so a two-factor authentication or having some sort of managed services on your devices, then that would be a requirement. I think you mentioned comply to connect. If you don't comply with these, we won't allow you to connect to a network on your BYOD. So those are, I think, some standard policies that are in effect even now, and I think will need to be expanded. Very likely it will become some sort of a financial directive from the central banks across the board. And I don't know if that's the case in Israel or not, but that's where things are heading at this stage.
So do you think there's the business case currently to push this being a true international standard?
I think anything to make that a true international standard has been absolutely impossible. So I think at best we'll be looking at directives and guidelines from central banks who have the authority. You guys who work for them, they know that. We can make it happen country by country, but it's very hard to make it an international standard which everyone must adhere to, because people have different levels of risk tolerance and risk management on their side.
You have national standards with cars. You don't allow cars that don't pass certain tests to go on the road.
Right, exactly.
So
that's
and the same goes for credit cards. You have the PCI.
You have the
standard.
PCI standard.
right. So I think that's what I'm saying. We are heading towards that. In the World Bank, we already have done that. Many of the countries are doing it. But I don't know whether we can make it an international standard, because
You don't believe, but it will happen. Just
It's
if
possible.
You didn't believe 50 years ago you can have standard car checkup.
Yes, but I think
Right.
there is a big difference between car standards and PCI standards, because they are regulating the manufacturers or the company, the credit card companies.
Just like
Here,
Visa is regulating each country's Visa. Visa is a non-profit organization.
just
don't
let
forget.
me finish. And here you're talking about, when you're talking about bring your own device policy, you're
that's
talking
exactly
about
the
the end
difference.
user.
Exactly. That's the
This
difference.
is the biggest problem.
Yes.
The end user,
You do not have
force
access
him
to the
do
device.
something, he will switch to another bank. If you are trying to enforce him to do something.
I don't believe so.
I would
I don't
argue that
believe so.
that's a business.
No, if we
That's a
look at
business.
even policy compliance from different nations, it's not, it's really difficult to enforce.
No,
exactly.
the other bank is under the same regulator and will have the same demands. So if he moves to another bank, he meets the same regulations.
No, I think you're right.
It's sometimes we don't believe things can be done,
I think
but reality makes them happen,
End user
even if you don't
more
believe.
problematic.
so the difference is in a credit card, the credit card is issued by your bank or credit card company. Issuer, correct?
Yeah.
In the case of a device, it's a home-owned device which you don't always have access to. So you could prevent them from connecting. That's the way what we are doing. That If you don't have my MDM on your machine, you're out of luck. You're not going to connect. So we can do that, and that's what we are doing. And I think it will, you're right, it will probably become standard over time, but I don't think it will become a mandatory thing. It's very hard to do in the world at this point in time.
Today you give your people a SIM client, correct? So there's nothing they can do. With the cloud, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, people will not have computers at home. Their image will be on the cloud, and everybody will have a SIM client, and then you can impose it.
Yeah, I think that possibly it'll change, and I think the point that I think we're making is that it's a little bit different than a credit card company, because you actually issue the credit. It's owned almost by the credit card issuing company. Your laptop or your iPad is not owned by me. I mean, you bring your own. You may have multiple devices. You have a smartphone and an iPad. You can use any of these devices, and it's very hard for us to control all of those devices you own. You can do it for one or maybe two, but if you got, normally in our house we probably have 9 devices at the moment, and there's no bank can control all of them. They'll run out of money to put MDMs on my machines. So just the practical issues, that's what I'm getting at. Any other comments?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think there's a business case for some type of minimum standard, but then the companies that want to go far and beyond, that want to have a higher security, that's their offering. And it's a terms of service agreement. So on your Android or on your iPhone, about once every month or two, you have to agree to the terms of service, TOS. You're protecting yourself, but you're also protecting the network. Comply to connect. So if you want, you want secure banking on your phone or your computer, you have choices. Bank A has a minimum standard. Bank C has a high standard. They require more. You can choose them, or you can go over here. I think there's room for both. You have to protect not just your current customer, but you have to protect your own network. And this BYOD is a huge issue. Huge issue. You guys know they can't fix the software holes that exist. People that are persistent, state actors will get into it. They will get there if they need to before the defenses can be done. So you have to have layered defenses. You have to do things that make sense.
Can't get BYOD, you have to move towards BYOB.
Bring your own model.
So in the U.S., the Information Sharing and Analysis Center really is the only industry forum for collaboration on critical security threats facing the financial services sector. When attacks occur, early warning and expert advice can mean the difference between business continuity and widespread business catastrophe. Members of the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center receive timely notification and authoritative information specifically designed to help protect critical systems and assets from physical and cybersecurity threats. Is there a model like this out there that could be adopted for international collaboration as well? And should we have one?
Okay, that was a long question. You kind of lost me.
I can take it.
Can you take it? Yeah,
So I think the gist of the question is that in the US we have a collaboration model that actually allows sharing of information on cybersecurity threats. And albeit I believe that it doesn't work very well, we need a lot more of that. And this has been my pet peeve, honestly, that there's not sufficient collaboration and sharing of information on cybersecurity threats within a sector and between the government, intelligence, and law enforcement and the financial sector. I personally have been involved in many of these discussions with our own law enforcement in the U.S. But it's almost like drawing teeth. So it's so hard to get people certified to receive information from the FBI, because they will not just send it to any organization. The person who receives it in the organization must be certified by the FBI before they can be part of that network. And which is fair, but to get a person certified, it takes like years to get them there. And so I think a lot of practical problems that still need to be worked out, But there's no doubt that this is what I've been saying in the morning as well, that my belief is that there is no individual institution that can withstand the kind of attack that are coming from sophisticated actors. We only spend money in millions of dollars, tens of millions. These guys spend in billions. There's no way to prevent that attack from happening unless we collaborate with the intelligence agencies and globally as well. So I think this is where it needs to go in my mind.
Okay, I believe that collaboration is key, but you have to be motivated to actually collaborate. Because what does that mean? You know, if you're attacked and you understand what's going on, you want to alert your neighbor. But how do you do that? In a way that you're not going to compromise your business as a bank. So, okay, all right, so we may have a channel between the government and businesses or the banks, where the banks can say, well, we know this is what we're seeing on our networks. Have you seen anything like that? And then the government will say, well, we know we're kind of like facing the same sort of threats and you know, attacks and exploits and whatnot. Then that's that's a collaboration, true collaboration at that point. Now, what the bank will actually expect from the government is privacy. Correct?
Right.
I mean, you can't go out there and share this stuff out in the public. But the motivation, and this has to be, you know, a two-way street, by the way. We can't, you know, we have, how many bills we have now in Congress? I think that we have 50 cyber bills trying to pass, talking about how we can collaborate and share data and knowledge and situation awareness. It's crazy. Because what's the motivation? Well, let's think about government. Government will be thinking about national security. Industry, the banks will be thinking about what? Profitability. They're a lot different. You know, now to actually find that balance, so you can say, well, you know, I'm an agency, and I would like to share, to create this channel of communication with you, you know, Bank of America. So what do you want from me? I mean, there's got to be something in it for, you know, for bank, for the government. I mean, that stuff has to be, you can't just force industry, I don't believe, to share intel. And he was talking about cyber intel. You were talking about cyber intel. That's extremely important. You know, we all have cyber intel. But you know, you have to trust your partner. You know, that you're going to share this stuff with. And then why would you do it? For money? Tax breaks? Maybe because you're forced, you're going to be fined if you don't do it. You know, in the U.S. now, we're having a huge issue. You know, we want to collaborate. We want to create those channels. But then, what is the motivation? And what are what guarantees do I have that if I approach you and I say, look, you know, this is what happened to me. By the way, sir, my logs of my 5,000 clients. Now, how are you going to store my data? What are you going to do with my data? See,
no one will know that you are the publisher.
Well, those are things that should be, you know, worked out. That's what Congress is trying to figure it out. You know, work the details of how this collaboration will take place. This is not only a problem in the U.S., I don't think. You guys probably have the same issue here. Okay, you're attacked, and then what? You know, you go and you talk to the CERT. You know, will they actually share this stuff with other certs? So I think that we have a trust issue of how this data is shared. It is important and it's critical, but honestly, I don't know how to do this. Yes.
I think the motivation for sharing knowledge is that if you give some of your knowledge, in the future you get some back.
You receive
This-
that
this
you receive that
knowledge and
information
this
from the
intel
government.
You can check across your system and see if you compromise or not. But this is the basic. You need someone to be the first one to share the knowledge in order to others
To follow
them
your
and,
example.
You could-
that's the motivation. You need to protect yourself and get as much as intel as you can.
Now, let me ask you guys, here in Israel, do you have any kind of bill or anything talking about this information sharing? Is that something that you guys are talking about?
Few communities who have
לא ביל, האם יש חוק? האם יש הצעת חוק בנושא של
regulation.
No, I'm talking about,
Sharing.
There is a law.
yeah.
It was approved in the parliament. It is the responsibility of the Israeli Security Agency,
Okay.
which is the kind of Shin Bet, okay,
Okay.
to give relevant information in case there is such to the critical infrastructure organizations. And
Okay.
there's a strict list which is critical and which is not. If you're in the list, then you are engaged with this process. If you are not, let's say you are with the health sector, which is not critical in Israel,
Okay.
then you will not be in the list of this dissemination.
And banking would be part of this list of critical infrastructure?
This year, yes.
Yes. This year.
This year.
Then you
But still, it is much better than the situation, I believe. It is much better than the situation in the States.
Let me just
Okay.
maybe add a question.
all right.
From my experience in the States, at the World Bank, we have been receiving information from the FBI. So it's not like they don't do it. We've received two proactive threat alerts for which helped us to program it into our system so we didn't get affected by that threat. So it does actually work in some ways, but it's not something at a point where we're all comfortable it's happening on a normal routine basis where information is being collected, is being disseminated to all the critical places. And that's the process we need to get to. And a lot of issues need to be worked out about, transparency, about privacy, about confidentiality. But there is a mechanism that they have developed de facto. So when we receive the information from FBI, I don't know which other victims in the U.S. were affected. But we just know what the signature was, what should we watch out for, how can we prevent it from happening to us. That's the information we get.
It's called red flag.
Exactly. So red flag, that's usually what we will receive and that work. And just to sort of build on what you were saying, I had a chance to discuss with Dr. Rami Efratz here. Frati. He did mention that in Israel they are putting this thing, when there was a delegation that came to Washington in late May, and we had that discussion, and he did mention, not too many details, but he did mention that this program was getting in place or is in place in Israel.
Is that a two-way street where the government would expect industry to also share information?
Yes, it's
Absolute.
If you are a critical infrastructure,
Right.
then you have to share.
So you have to share.
If you are in the list of what is
Right.
critical. If you are not in the list, then it depends on you.
optional.
And I believe that many of those organizations, companies, corporates, would prefer, not to expose the fact that networks were breached.
Okay, you would have to share. If you don't, then you have there's consequences of not being fined and things like that. Yes.
We found that technical level people, even in competing organizations, are much more likely to share information. So
Yeah, that is true. I agree with you. Yeah.
It's what's happening on the day. You know? It's what's happening, so we're trying to sort of build on that and make it a little more formal.
Ah.
So that has
Coalition of the willing.
what's up?
Well, I mean, that's and a lot of times that's where you're going to get your most reliable information most quickly. Is going to be that peer-to-peer network that forms among the technical people across all the different organizations. Even just within the military, you know, odds are by the time
somebody.
you just call. It's like that in many different organizations. It's a lot faster if you to call somebody up and talk to the person sitting over here that you know would have first-hand information instead of waiting for it to come all the way up and then all the way back down.
Yeah, because if you try to do it through the board, I don't know how well that would go down like you pointed out. But technical people are much more likely to share.
So you kind of like formalize that communication that's already taken place. That's interesting.
I'll use an analogy. Like in the Air Force, if there's an accident, there's two investigations. One is a safety investigation. No one's interested in fault. They're trying to understand if the plane had a problem, so they can deal with the problem in the jet right away, because they don't want other jets falling out of the sky or whatever. The second investigation is who's culpable, who's responsible. Was it pilot error? Was it something that you did wrong? Did you not follow procedure? And I think there's an analogy for that for cyber breaches, because if you can organize the ROE, the rules of engagement, to where it's a safety concern for the health of the financial sector, and you're not blaming, you're not you're trying to understand, then you can share that information, because there's got to be something that you can do that's similar or analogous to that, so you protect the innocent, but you also work together to try to deal with these APTs, advanced persistent threats, or these cyber crime organizations. I think we have to get there. You have to have shared awareness, and I think we're fooling ourselves to think we can take care of it on our own. As you mentioned, organizations in certain countries are spending maybe billions of dollars trying to figure out how to take advantage of protocols and hardware and software and so forth. And they're going to find a way, and the only way to have a chance, frankly, is band together. That's what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So, like I did with Paul earlier, I think I'm going to build upon something that you mentioned earlier, Marc. As nation state A is a NATO partner, should nation state A seek assistance against an asymmetric group that has launched an attack? And would this be possible or practical in this type of scenario?
Well, since of course. Now you say seek assistance. That's everything from gathering intelligence to providing support. To everything. I mean, you should take advantage of your allies and your friends, because they're going to need help the next go around. What comes around goes around. It just works that way. And so, yes, I think you invoke your treaties, your allies, your coalition of the willing, and you bring that to the table immediately. Now, what all that includes depends on the situation and depends on information available. But they can help you build that situation, help you build the facts, and frankly, help you come up with courses of action, for another military term, courses of action or response options that make sense. And I think the more you do that, because Nation A had this happen to them, Nation F, Nation Z, it's going to happen to them. The more times you do it, the better you get at this. And the better you get at it, the quicker you share information. Maybe you can thwart attacks. You can start trying to be proactive instead of reactive.
I think that now in the international community, I think that certs have a great way of sharing information and threats and things like that. I believe that most countries, I think that every country has a CERT. Most countries I know. And they're all connected. So that's, again, it goes back to what he said. The technical community, the techies, they're the ones to go, hey, guess what? I just saw this 0 day. Have you seen this stuff? Do you know this piece of malware? And you go, oh no, man, yeah, I don't know. Maybe someone else knows it. I'm going to ask my friend from Hong Kong, and he's going to take a look at it. And you go, oh yeah, this is Chinese code. It's yeah, it's out. Oh man, so okay, so let's come up with some countermeasure or signature, and then that gets pushed to whatever Nessus or Snort, and then it becomes a rule, and then that gets pushed out to everybody. Now, certs do that really well. I think that the challenge here is to get that mentality, between, the government and industry. I think that that's definitely the challenge, because I think that there's a trust issue. There's a natural tendency of companies not to trust the government. I don't know if this is your case here, but in the U.S., definitely, a lot of organizations.
Would you trust someone who makes a contract with you only for 4 years? And then I'm not taking responsibility after that?
Look at, we have some interesting things taking place right now in the U.S. The whole trust issue, of your data. I honestly, I don't know. I really don't have any.
Everybody knew they were doing it. It just needed someone to come and say it, but everybody knew. They've been talking about it for the last 4 years. This is being a bit cynical.
Yeah.
Everybody is surprised. Everybody knew it. The things they had in Ireland, what they had in France. Americans are all over the place.
Okay, now let's talk about. Well, okay, there's a huge difference here. Okay, between intel collection and stealing intellectual property or IP. Those are two separate things. America is not the only nation out there, collecting intel, meaning, trying to understand what allies and friends or enemies, what they're up to. This is this is business as usual. Every country has, an intel organization, and countries will collect intel. That's how it is. But there's a huge difference between that and actually stealing R&D, IP that cost, industry millions or billions of dollars, and then using that to build your nation. We know some organizations. Do we have anyone from China here? No. Okay, so I can talk about it. China is a great example of that. They love to do it. They compromise their networks, and years of research and development is gone.
But you started first. You took advantage of their cheap labor. You started first. So they said, he did that to me, I'll do that to him my way.
No.
Yes.
It's just a matter of integrity. It's just understanding, hey, you know what? This is not how I'm going to grow my country. I'm going to grow my country by, doing research and development, investing in technologies, getting my people educated and creating my own stuff. Going out there and taking R&D, and then saying that that's fair game, it's definitely not fair game. Now, intel collection is different from, stealing IP. It's a different thing. And now, there's a lot of, people pointing fingers and saying, well, U.S. is doing this and that, and but this is, every nation does it. So.
Stick to the scenario.
Yeah, go back to the scenario. Back.
There you go. Thank you. All right. So to steer the conversation towards social media, which is not related at all. Cyber collectives and groups have increasingly been using social media over the past several years to gather, organize, stage, and launch civil protests. So for an asymmetric group such as this that may be doing that, should a nation ever consider blocking access to social media when cyber criminals are using this as a tool to organize and form attacks or protests?
Well, I guess I'm the social media guy.
Yeah, you are.
LinkedIn and 25,000 members. Well, I believe that social media is great. I don't see that as a threat to national security. In fact, I see social media as a great way to collaborate. And I'm here because of social media. It started as a LinkedIn forum, and now we're a nonprofit organization, 25,000 members. We do a lot of collaboration. We worked on a Stuxnet report, Layer 7 DOS attack report. Kailin, that's a Chinese operating system. We're trying to understand their code. We capture code. We do all kinds of things. We're working on Red October, understanding some Russian capabilities. And this is all in the public domain, open source. Right now, if you come to me and you say, Paul, I need to find a sample of malware, and this is what I'm looking for, I can guarantee you that I'll probably be able to get that under 30 minutes. Now, that is the power of the community. So I'm a big fan of crowdsourcing. I think it's the way to go. You can get a lot of capabilities. When we work as a community, we have people from all over the world, from different nations, collaborating. It's just a beautiful thing to see. And again, it goes back to that mentality of how us technical guys, how we think about this stuff. We're all trying to understand it, and we're all trying to create countermeasures to be able to protect ourselves. So I'm a big fan of social media. By the way, I think it's important.
I would just say that you need to have both options. So I would argue you need a counter strategy for if they were using social media. You need a counter strategy utilizing the social media to damper their effect, damper their capability. At the same time, I always want all the arrows in my quiver. I would have some type of plug, kill switch if I needed to. If I'm responsible for a certain area and it gets out of hand, or that's the last resort, I want to have that option. It's not one that I want to use. It's like I don't think CNA is the best option. In fact, usually that's the hammer. That's the last thing I want to do. I think doing demarches and things like that, state to state, cooperation, allies, and so forth is the better way to do it. But if you have to do CNA, then you have to do it. But you need to look at all the options. So I think you keep all options on the table. Just like
you may want to explain CNA.
Computer network attack. That's what CNA stands for. So for like in Boston, when the bomb went off during the marathon, somebody killed the signal to the cell towers around that area. No one's claiming who did it or whatever. But if you have to think about, a secondary or a third wave of attack, you have to take drastic measures because you don't not control the situation. So you always This is my military side coming out. You always have to have all the options, or at least the most extreme options. Is it something I want to do? No, because someone will tell you the social media or the ability to talk on the phones and to communicate is just as important. But at that time, right then and there, it was critical to potentially shut down, more attacks that were targeting first responders and so forth. So you have to think through that process, and you have to go left and right of the boom, if you know what that means, and think through it. But if you're not thinking about your own counter social media strategy, you're wrong. You have to be there. The adversary's there, you have to be there. That's where that intel starts building. I mean, you have to be there.
And I think intrinsically the question on whether we control the social media or not, to me, we all would have a bias of keeping it open, but having countermeasures in place. I mean, that is a given. I think the issue of whether we need to have this arrow in our quiver, and I agree with Marc on that, it would be used as a last resort. We've seen that happen not only in Boston, but back in 9/11, the World Bank is situated a block from the White House. And at that time, when that happened, we could see the Pentagon burning, and we knew that the fourth plane was in the air, and the Secret Service got in touch with us saying that's happening. And at that point in time, they cut off all the cell towers in that area because there were other secondary bombs that could have gone off and things. So it does happen. And they will not advertise it, but this is standard operating procedure for around those areas. So such a scenario could happen in a social network, but it would need to have that kind of immediacy and intelligence that says, yes, there's a fourth plane coming and we need to do something. Or there have been 3 bombs and there could be 4 more, so let's cut this. That's a different scenario. If that is the case, then yes, it could be activated in good faith. But otherwise, I would see simply leaving that open and countermeasures being in place, which in this case, it doesn't seem to be an imminent threat through the social media.
So we've talked about the immediates. How do you go back out there and you say, yes, we've been attacked. Yes, we have this reputational damage. Yes, there's been a breach of trust with the public. How, after the initial stages, once all the details are on the table, once we're able to look back in retrospect and say, this is what happened, this is what went wrong, here were our lessons learned, how do you begin to circle back around and recover from the reputational damage of that attack?
Well, I think that, lessons learned. Definitely the lack of communication was an issue. The fact that a lot of suspicious traffic took place, and we had no, situation awareness, and we were not able to communicate with the right, proper actors. That's definitely a big mistake. Because that's how everything started, with that compromise. Then from that point on, things just got worse. So that would be, to me, the thing that disturbs me the most would be the lack of communication. With certs and the organizations, and again, a collaboration that's just never took place.
So preparation. I mean, if you are entrusted with important missions, important business practices, you need to be prepared. So that's what frustrates me. But I think you're repairing the damage to the public starts immediately by being factual and putting your best foot forward, and laying out a roadmap. This is our game plan. You're not going to be able to prevent everything, but you have to have due diligence. You have to show that you are doing the right things at the right time. And still, things are going to happen, but you pick yourself up and dust yourself off, and you prepare better.
I think the question that you were asking is in terms of how do we recover from this reputational damage that's taken place. And to some degree, I mean, the scenario, I don't know how it unfolds, but the way I would see it unfolding is in the first couple of days, we would staunch the hemorrhage to some degree. I mean, we would do all the things we talked about, helping the liquidity in the banking system, enforcing certain cross-border payments to nation B, all those kinds of things, and having the governor of central bank go off onto the television and talk to the people. That's sort of the first 2-3 days incident response sort of thing. While we energize and engage our teams to do the forensics, trying to figure out who was at the source of this attack. So probably between the first 2-3 days and the weekend, you would know probably that it didn't come from nation state B. They would have, said, look, we have nothing to do with it. You would also probably have signed that evidence that points back to Organization Bravo, and you would start focusing on them. And if that is a scenario that unfolds, at some point when we have lessons learned and to regain the trust of the people, we would be able to share a lot of what actually happened. And the more, I think, as Marc said earlier, the honesty we bring to this, the more the confidence gets restored relatively quickly. The other thing that public would look for, and I think that's the point you're also making, is how prepared are we for the next such attack? That's what people would look for. And I think that's a matter of the government to take action on, here are the steps we're taking to be prepared, and how such a thing next time round would be prevented. I think those steps would probably prepare the grounds for regaining the public's trust and confidence.
Also, I believe that new laws and regulations put in place, because the people want to see that when something like that happens, they want to see the plan, but they want to see the now this is part of the law, or this is a new regulation that the communication channel, data sharing and whatnot, this has to take place. So I think that the creation of laws and regulations, from that point on, that would get people happy.
Yes.
I think one of the lessons that could be learned from a scenario like this is that in any situation where state, national, federal funds making payments to constituents, a lot of the risk in having an attack against that mechanism affect the national sovereignty in a way is not to make all of those payments on a single day to constituents. Everywhere I can think about in the world, so the security payments or any payments that are made by the state are made on a set day. And maybe the question is the World Bank, to Ash as a representative of the World Bank, are you aware of anywhere that's kind of had this lesson and spread that out? So the day one of the attack, you're only having a 30th of the effect that an attack like this could have in a situation where everyone's getting Social Security on the 10th of the month.
Well, I mean, I'm aware that they do not put all their eggs in one basket. Typically, in a social action payments that we make in Tanzania or whatever, the system may generate the beneficiary and the payments to them, but they're routed through multiple banking channels. They're usually not done through the same or one banking channel. And that's largely due to the fact that all banks don't have coverage in the whole country or wherever things are going. So there are other reasons for choosing multiple banking channels. So that's the way I've seen that, and in a sense that would mitigate such a scenario. You could have more, but I think the point you make is valid, that perhaps it could be staggered in a different way. I hadn't thought about that, but yes.
And it's all, even if it's different channels, it's all coming from one source on one day.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, so I think a valid point to consider to stagger and mitigate those risks in some ways. I think that's a very good point.
It was a very good point. We actually wanted to dedicate the remainder of the time just for any for any questions you might have or any discussions you might want to have with anything anyone said today, anything at all. It doesn't have to be strictly related to this scenario. It could be related to any of the things we've talked about up here. So feel free to pipe up if you have anything.
I mean, if I may just add, I mean, some of the things they've been talking about, getting the governments to speak up on TV, I've never seen it happen. Almost always the governments will not want to do this on channels. And I think that is an area where, although it's the right thing to do, you will find that I haven't come across an example where the government's taken on the onus of actually going on TV and sharing with what's going on. They just don't do it. And something to keep in mind. I mean, this is a scenario that we're building and talking about, but for various reasons, I mean, they just don't do it.
Which I'll just add, I think it's the wrong approach.
It is the wrong approach, but that.
When I was during the Iraq War, the last one, one of the news channels had reported that a Marine tank, yes.
Oh, sorry.
The Marines were attacking a school. This is what they reported. The fact is that Al-Qaeda had booby-trapped that school so severely that they were using a tank to breach the wall so they could get in there and try to start removing some of the booby traps so the kids could start going back to the school. But because we weren't proactive on it, what got passed across the wire was the Marines were attacking a school. So I think you have to be up front with facts, lead the story, and develop it the way that makes sense for you to protect your actions. Waiting and not reporting, I think, opens yourself up to speculation or Group B to say what they want to say. You get the lead story. Mm-hmm. I think you got to lead from the front. I think it's absolutely the wrong way approach, especially when you're trying to gain and maintain confidence of your people.
We had a tabletop exercise a little bit like this, and the scenario was that one of our terrorist organization was hitting our IT systems, and they were leaking this out to the public. And when our manager wanted to go public with the details, just like you said, our advice as information security guys was, no, don't give the rival indications that he was successful. Keep him in the dark.
So that is a strategy. That's a little bit different than what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, it's also different
because the U.S., you will never shoot down an American airplane. We will never give you the credit for that. We just don't do it. We will never give you the credit for that. So an adversary, if he shoots down one of our planes, we will never say that they did it.
Okay.
We will never give him the credit for that. So I understand that approach. But this is, I think, different because you're worried about public opinion. You already have a situation.
You have to secure your image.
Yes. So, I mean, it depends on the situation. I hate to say that, but it really does.
Cause a panic in the financial system and the liquidity, that's the scenario we're dealing with. The ATMs have gone down, people can't get money. It's, that's, I think, the real issue. Otherwise, I don't think it would warrant that kind of a response. So you would probably do it the Washington way, leak it to the Washington Post.
But I hear what you're saying. I think it's very situational. You have to look at, what you're trying to protect. What's your strategic goals? Right. Okay. What else?
There was another question there or no?
What do you think about the legitimacy of attacking the attacker?
The legitimacy of attacking the attacker?
Instead of mitigating or defense. To be proactive.
Like active defense type of thing, or you?
I think I'll pass it to these guys.
I'm all for it, but you have to be out on the wire to understand what's going on. You can't be behind the game. You have to see what's going on. You have to know what's going on. We have, I used to, one of my jobs back 10 years ago was to work time-sensitive targeting, TST. And there was, the Army had a discussion about detect, decide, attack, or deliver, I should say, and assess. But the reality is you had to decide what you wanted to detect, because you had to put the right sensors in the air to detect, but you had to decide what you wanted to detect. The point that I'm trying to make is that if you want to be able to respond, have a response option, you better be there and know what's going on, because an errant strike back will cause you more damage. I think, potentially.
Attacking the attacker, not always to stop him from work. It's to
Deter?
It's probably deterrence.
Get information from him.
Sure. So we call that IGL, intel gain loss. So, you have to figure that out. That's that balancing act, the art of warfare. And so, yes, is he just one of many? Or do you live on his systems and understand what we call pattern of life and his connections? So, like in this scenario, nothing new under the sun. This organization had to test its ability to access the network somehow. Where's the baselining? Where's your own internal metrics to understand something's not right? And then with that information, it's not always defense. You have your hunters. It's a word that is used out there today. Hunters going out into other people's networks and understanding what's going on. And maybe you gain information by listening to them or watching them that helps you either defend or preempt. It's the game, right?
I think we need to be clear about, in this particular scenario, in the hierarchy of responses, where would the government and the nation state focus their energy and attention on? Clearly, the first order of business is the financial sector, keeping it calm and moving and liquid and all of that. The issue of attacking the attacker as a legitimate, where we have a very high level of confidence, knowing that this is the attacker, then I think it's a legitimate response. But it might take us a week to get there, is what I was saying. And in this case, if it turns out to be Organization Bravo, I would just shut them down, period. So, question of attacking somebody who's inside your own country, let's put those buggers in jail or whatever you need to do. But I would not have to deal with it from an attack, from a cyber attack perspective. It would be just roll them up. Right. And I'm sure they can do that easily if you know it's internal to our own country. And, I think there have been cases like that. So I think the calibrated response is, again, where I would go with it. And if it is indeed an external country, external organ outside, then it is a legitimate response where you have a high degree of confidence, which in this case, at this stage, we don't. So I think it should be in your arsenal, but it may not be your first instinct to react to that.
That's all we've got. I appreciate y'all coming this afternoon.
Thank you very much.